Hi everyone, my name is Alexey Grinevich. Today we will talk about Rapise new version 6.7 and we will go through new features that appeared in this version. I'm still Alexey. You probably know me. We met you on demos and in different webinars. And for those who don't know me, there is some information about it. And now let's switch to the topic of today's speech. I'll stop sharing the camera and this should save some screen space so you better see the application and what I'm going to demonstrate. So Rapise 6.7 and as we talk about what's new, you may learn about it from our documentation site. So if you go to rapisedoc.inflectra.com and switch to release notes, you should see the release notes for this version 6.7, and each feature here has a link to corresponding topic in the documentation covering this particular change in more detail. And today we will mostly go over these features, and I'll just add some video demonstration of what is said in these documentation topics. So first feature is an RVL toolbox. Let me open Rapise and let me create a new test. And it should be toolbox test web1. So what I want to do is I want to create, for example, I'm creating some test. You see some a panel appears here in RVL when I open it, and it moves away. You may fix it if you find it useful for you, or you may keep it this way. You may keep it disappearing and just show it when you need. So this is a way to get quick access to various documentation topics. For example, if I'm interested in testing frameworks, I may see the link to the topic covering frameworks, as well as a number of knowledge base articles, and I may select any of them and click the link, and this one will be shown to me. So this is the quick way to access information. But information is not the only thing that we get from the toolbox. In addition to that, it contains some snippets. And for example, some topics here contain curly braces, and when I select them, we have this yellow section telling drag selection in to insert item into RVL, like this one. But this is not really, this one is not really interesting until we have some objects recorded. But it's easy to show some others. For example, there is a third way to access the toolbox is by just start typing what you want to achieve right here in RVL. So if we have an empty line here and type something like open browser and hit enter key, enter, you see it finds relevant topics related to open browser. And if one of them matches my expectations, you see open browser is currently selected right here. And I hit enter again. And the snippet inserted that opens a browser. All I need to do is to just type the URL. This way, I may even create some some simple scripts, for example, same conditions, empty line, type in what I want, hit enter, toolbox suggests close a browser snippet, and that's it. So what I have right now, I have a piece of script that may even be executed. So it should navigate to inflectra.com, and finally it would close it if it would open it, but it connected to existing browser. So that was the feature called Toolbox. We hope you will find it useful. So it's an easy access to snippets and to KB articles. So if you get stuck with what you want to do, for example, you want to wait for something, for example, wait for object to appear. So this is the best way to find relevant topics about that. Or you may, if you search right from here, it would find even more, because searching from here filters to only snippet topics that may be inserted, and searching from here shows all the topics, including KB articles, like this one. And clicking here would open it in the browser. Next feature in Rapise 6.7 is a couple of extensions for Azure pipelines. And this is something worth to demonstrate. So Azure pipelines is CI/CD facility that may be used for building your application, as well as executing test sets. So here I have some demo Azure DevOps account, and account it's multi-layered. So overall, it's really something really complicated, and requires some learning curve to get better understanding what is where here. So and it is organized in a way that there is a root organization, and organization contains some projects. So to use new feature that new extensions that we developed, you first need to go to organization settings in your Azure DevOps account, and go to extensions section. And you may see that one extension is already installed here. It's RapiseLauncher extension. It's expansion specially for Azure DevOps. And we have actually two extensions for two different use cases, and finding both of them is easy. So what I did, I clicked on Browse Marketplace. Here is the marketplace. I searched for Rapise, and two extensions are found. One is RapiseLauncher, which is already installed, and another is Rapise Test Adapter. So difference between these two is the following. RapiseLauncher executes tests from Spira. So all you need is to just tell which Spira test set is to execute, and that's it. Rapise Test Adapter executes tests stored elsewhere, and it execute, and the test set is defined by yourself using usual test adapter facilities. It's Visual Studio Test Adapter, so you should be more or less familiar with that. And in this way, you may execute any set of tests. So the tests are stored in somewhere in Git or in some source control system, and this way you are able to execute them using just the test adapter. We will now demonstrate the first option using RapiseLauncher. Although both options are described in the documentation, so you may find detailed information about each of them. So suppose we just install RapiseLauncher, and I already have it installed. And once you have RapiseLauncher extension for organization, you may go to particular project, for example, this one. And in the project settings, you will need to define the connection to Spira. I already have it configured. It's called Spira connection here. And this way, my pipeline would know where to find the tests, information about test set and test set itself, and where to put test execution result. So, and I just configured it, and configuration is following. It requires you to enter Spira URL, username, API key that you may get from Spira, and just specify some name of the Spira connection. That's it. So after it's done, you may verify a connection to Spira, and if it's successful, in this case it's successful, you may proceed to define a pipe, do a pipeline, and just execute something. So I'm creating a pipeline here. It uses one of possible repositories. I already have an empty Azure DevOps repository. It may be created right here, so I'll just use it. And I'm choosing the starter pipeline, minimal version of the pipeline, the execution. So Rapise is a Windows application. So what I need to change here, I need to change the type of host from Ubuntu to Windows, and Windows latest is fine. Now, what I can do is I can use the assistant. So these two actions may be removed. It's just the demo actions, or maybe left here, so they make no sense. They do some output, and here I'm searching for my Rapise extension, and here it is. Run. It contains my Rapise extension added a pipeline step, run Rapise test set, and I need to configure some data for this test step. Since I already have a connection, I need to choose it. And after I choose a connection, I can just use drop down to find a product, Spira product. Choose Spira test set and choose an automation host. So this instance would introduce itself as this automation host. The benefit of this integration is when I say Windows latest, this means that the machine for executing it would be created by Microsoft. It's a Microsoft hosted instance. So I don't have any VM where this will be executed. It will be provided just for executing this test set. And this is very convenient. This VM is well tailored for test execution. It has all browsers installed. It has all WebDriver connectors with right versions already installed. All the browsers all have updates switched off, although these are latest versions. So it's very convenient to execute tests. And you may use it to execute web tests, as well as any desktop tests, providing that you put your application here. But let's just execute this test set. This test set contains web test. All I need to specify here is Rapise version. So this step would install Rapise before executing this step, because we have like new virtual machine created for test execution. I'll just use exactly the same version number I have here, 2235. And I may specify additional options for execution, which are usually really convenient. So test set screen resolution, since it's external VM created just for this run, sometimes it's important to have control over screen resolution, because default resolution is something like 1000 per 800, so it's minimal resolution. And for some applications, it's not enough. So I'm setting it to HD, to full HD. And I want to record video of execution, because since it's remote host, it's created and then destroyed after execution. I want to have a chance to see what was going on there. And optionally, I may touch RapiseLauncher log, probably not this time, but sometimes it's useful when something goes wrong. Enabling it helps to resolve issues. And after specifying all that, I just say add. Oops. I should do it here. So it adds the step right here after all the scripts. And that's it. Now I may click Save and Run. And it should start executing my test set. Later on, I may return, so I may monitor this execution. Later on, I may return and review results, or I may modify this pipeline. As you may see, its structure is straightforward, and even without this wizard task editor, you may still see that it's trivial. So if I want to change test set, I may just change its ID. I may change Rapise version and other options right from here. I'm not going to do this right now. So now execution is going on. Usually this execution takes about 3 or 4 minutes. And the first 2 minutes is Rapise download and installation. It downloads Rapise from cloud, installs it, and then executes the test. So about 3 minutes, 3-4 minutes needed for execution. And this is just one option to use Microsoft hosted engine. Also, you may use the same approach to execute with your virtual machine. So you may have your machine where you have your application, all browsers or whatever is needed to configure the test set. And instead of using the pool that we used here, you may use your host for execution and just configure the pipeline a bit differently. Or you may add more steps in your pipeline that build your application before running the test. So it's standard options for CI/CD execution. We won't wait for execution to finish right now. We may return to this topic later. And now we will proceed to some other features from Rapise 6.7. In 6.7, we enriched the command line interface of RapiseLauncher and also added a couple of features that help to enable some use cases of test set execution. And you may find information about them in here in our documentation. I'm searching for RapiseLauncher command line. So new options here are the param. You may specify the parameter for each test that would be passed to each executed test. Also, when executing a test set, you may specify not only one test set that was possible before, but also a number of test sets. So you may run RapiseLauncher and give it a list of test sets to execute. So it will execute all of them and then will bail out. So it's sort of command line way for executing tests, and it may be useful if you integrating RapiseLauncher with your CI/CD pipeline that is other than Azure. Also, you may specify what screen resolution to use for test execution. This is also useful for CI/CD use cases when you need some more control over what is going on. So these are new command line options. And in addition to them, there is one useful feature that I'm going to demonstrate for remote test set execution. So default behavior of RapiseLauncher is that it sits on some machine and monitors for available test sets to run. So let's, for example, look at this machine, which is another VM that has Rapise installed. It has RapiseLauncher running. So suppose I have it configured, I assign the host ID so it's ready to run. And now to enable remote test execution, I need to properly close this machine. So if I just use this way, it would close graphical session and UI tests may fail. Also, when I'm closing this, screen resolution changes. So there is more graceful way now. So older way was to use special script. And now you may just do it from here. First of all, you may go to configuration and say that you want this screen resolution to be used when you execute tests. So when we disconnect, it would assign this full HD screen resolution to the session. And then when everything is configured and it just need to run the tests unattended, like nightly tests or some regular tests, what I need to do, I just need to use disconnect RDP session right from here, and it would properly close this session. So now this session is disconnected in a special way that keeps the session running with proper screen resolution, so your tests will execute properly. This was most important features of RapiseLauncher. One other feature that you may need to be aware of is test set attachments. It's described in the documentation. So sometimes you want to pass things like configuration files to test sets. So they are per test set. And now you may attach them to Spira test set. Let's go to Spira. Let's switch to test sets. We have one of them, and there is test set has an attachment section. So if I attach something here to the attachments of a test set, then the test could use this information, and it may contain something like configurations. Okay, so this so far we covered RapiseLauncher new features. Going next, it's new NodeJS Engine. So by default, Rapise is historically had only Microsoft JavaScript engine under the hood. And since this JavaScript engine is outdated and Microsoft didn't do any changes with it for last like 12 years or so, we started to enable new JavaScript features through migration to NodeJS Engine. So right now, this enables one to use some new features. Let me create a new test and try to demonstrate what I mean. I'm creating a test. Let it be, for example, web test. I don't need RVL here. So suppose that I need to use some external functionality, and typically example of such functionality is that you need, for example, to find some converter. You want to work with properties file, which is specific to Java, or YAML file that comes from Python, or you need some conversion. And usually if you try to search for something like that, you will find an npm module. And the typical example is that, for example, you have a web service that returns an XML. So even some REST services return only XML, while it's more convenient to use JSON, because we have JavaScript here. So it's easy to work with JSON, but it's much harder to work with XML. And there are routines to convert XML to JSON, and they are available as NPM, as Node.js NPM packages. But if you don't have Node.js and if you don't use NPM, it becomes a much harder task. So we may now, it was impossible before, and it was impossible to add such a model. Now it is possible. Let's see what I mean. You may now open the folder with your root test or your test framework, or just with your test. Let me open this folder, copy its path, run command line. So now I may install a model. I have Node.js installed into this system separately, so I have an npm. Once I have npm, I need to do a couple of things. I may do npm init. Just a second. I need to do cd before doing init. Okay, agree to everything, and I get the package.json in this folder. Now I may do npm install and install a couple of modules. First is XML to JSON. Let me check. I think it's XML to JSON. Oh, XML to JS and JSON path. These two modules. And there is now Node modules subfolder in my test. Now I may try to use it using default way. There is a require function that should be able to import the module, and I may start working with it. But if I just play it now, it would show me an error because it gets executed using the old engine. So I'm switching to Node.js. I'm selecting the test here in the files view test, or going to test settings, which is the same. So these are the same settings. Go into JS Engine section and choosing different engine for this particular test. It would be Node. Now, if I just play this, my require statement works. So I may use this Node module, start using this Node module in my test. And long story short, let me just demonstrate how it ends when it's all implemented. I have a complete example. So here I have an XML file. So this is something maybe exported from application or returned from web service, and it contains some information about books. And suppose that I need a list of book titles to get it from here. So old way was to use XML procedures, and Rapise has them, but they require some XPath or some iterations. So sometimes it's a bit harder than dealing with JSON. So we load this XML to JS, and we load the XML itself, and we convert XML to JSON. And once it converted, we use a JSON path package that allows to quickly query something from the JSON object. In this case, I'm getting array of titles of all books in my XML. And I'm attaching this array to the tester message. So if I just play this test, it should contain list of all book titles here in the description for the books message. So this was like convenient way. And there are hundreds of thousands, I think, NPM models for different purposes. and I hope you will find them useful. So sometimes it's the simplest way to achieve some functionality. So default behavior of changing the node engine is to change it here for the test. But if you think you will only use node everywhere, then you may change it globally. You need to go to global settings, and there is the similar setting JS engine type. So default is WScript, but if you switch it to Node, so all tests would by default use Node.js. Using Node.js Engine also means we may use new syntax of ECMAScript 6 with classes, with import, and everything else. We may use let statement. We may use const statement, and all the new achievements in JavaScript. For now, it is still an experimental support in Rapise, so it will improve with time. So you may use it and it would work, but if I save this script, Rapise parser would show warnings because it's now configured to check your test to be compatible with WScript or old version of JavaScript. So it just gives you a warning that its syntax is not correct for the old version of JavaScript, but if I play it anyway, if I ignore these warnings, it would still work. So runtime, Node.js runtime already understands this syntax, but Rapise JavaScript editor is still a bit behind. So just, but in many cases, you may fit into the old syntax. So there is a function instead of Lambda syntax like this. So there are two similar ways to define the same. So this way, both are valid, but this one would show some warnings, while this one is okay for both old and new JavaScript. Okay, so I will hope you find it useful. Next topic is improvements and in REST API testing. Let's create a new test. And before opening it, let me show the application we are going to work with. So there is a demo application called Create. It's doing something with delivery to subscribe to clauses, or something like that. And this application has an API which I may use to access it. And I'm going to use a couple of API entry points. But before doing that, let me show you how API is implemented in Create. So it uses the new version of REST API interface called GraphQL. And if I open this entry point, so GraphQL query is something like you see on the screen. So it's not it's not a JSON, it's something different. And difference between GraphQL and usual REST is that with REST entry point, we specify the query somewhere here by saying what we want, and all information is returned. With GraphQL, we just specify root URL here, and the whole query is formed in the query language, and we not only specify what to query, we also say what we want to be returned from that query and what data for what shape of data we want to receive. So while REST usually returns everything, this GraphQL is intended to limit this returned value to what you actually need, and this way to reduce traffic and make your web application more sufficient. So we use this interface. And here we have a couple of queries that I'm going to show you, and we are going to implement with Rapise. First of them is doing login. We call it user login, and there is a documentation, and it contains it's a feature of GraphQL implementation. Here it says that there is a function user login Here it is, and it accepts these parameters. So this is what I'm passing. And then I'm saying what I want it to be returned. I want it to return user object with ID, name, and email fields, as well as an authorization token that I would need. Let me send this query, and you will see typical results that returned from it. It returns the user that logged in, as well as some token that I will then need for some of other queries. So let me just create a new test here. Call it create API test, create API test, maybe desktop, just API. Let it be JavaScript. And let me create tools web service entry point. It would be REST. So GraphQL is closest to REST. So we use REST as a base and creating it. So our entry point is this one. And it is the same for all calls. Let me call it login. And now you may see there is one additional tab here in the body section. It's called GraphQL. So I may just copy this query, but okay, let me copy this query. And since this query should be wrapped inside the JSON for GraphQL, I should either properly format the JSON, and it has a format like that. And then the query itself should be escaped and put here. And escaping it is like a hard task. Other way is to do nothing here, just switch to GraphQL format, put my query, and then if I switch back, I see my query is automatically escaped and formatted as JSON. So I may just put GraphQL query and work with it right here. If I send it now, okay, I have a couple of things to fix. First of all, it's always post with GraphQL. And next one would be it must provide query string. It means that GraphQL expects me to explicitly say that I'm sending GraphQL formatted as JSON. So I need to add a header. Content type, I could also select it from here. Content type, application, JSON, which is most typical when working with REST services. Okay, now if I send it, I'm getting good real response. Now, one more thing, you see it's formatted as one-liner here, but it's more useful to prettify it, to have this query to look like that. I may prettify it, copy again, make sure I'm in GraphQL mode, paste here, so I have a GraphQL query here, and send it one more time. Okay, so now it does what I want. You see, it's formatted query, it's plain query that I have, and I'm getting some result in JSON format. Good. Next step, I want to add one more operation here that requires a token. And this way I will demonstrate one more feature in 6.7. So there is subscription by user, and it only works if I logged in as a user. Let me clone this request. Most common way. This way it clones this URL, and this content type, I just need to assign it a different name and change the query itself. Subscriptions by user, cloned. And now in subscriptions by user, go to GraphQL and change it with this query I have recorded. Another query is here. So send it. Okay, something's bad with this query. Okay, syntax error. Give me a second. Some invisible characters here. Let me try to do something. Let me use it here. Try it. Okay, so it works here. So I may prettify it, copy. So so this way I get rid from this weird character that doesn't let it work, and send. So now I get proper response. Please log in to view your subscriptions. So to bypass through this entry point, I need to specify information about login. And for this application, it's so-called bearer token. I could add it as a header, but if I use it this way, then I should every time run this action, copy this token and paste it here to be able to execute this statement. And I want to make it to be done automatically, so I don't need to copy paste any information manually. And now it's possible with Rapise. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select the first entry point and choose the after call callback. This is some JavaScript that will be executed after each call to this entry point. There is no existing entry points matching the signature, so I'm choosing add new. And it creates a function that receives the response from this operation. And this response should contain a token that I want to use in further actions. Now, the question is how to read the token from this from the output of this operation. So this is my call. This is response. I may just record this piece. I may hit record. I shouldn't be doing it, but I could do this as the simplest way. After I hit record, I may find proper value. So this is a token. This is the thing that I want to read. Read this token and create script based on this. So this is right piece of code that reads the value of the token from the response of the operation. So I'm copying it and I'm removing the rest of recorded scripts because I don't need it right now. I'm putting it right here. And instead of the login object, I'm using this response object. So this response has the same API as the REST server centers that are generated when I create a script. So it returns a token and I just need to assign it to the variable. I define the global variable. For example, token value. And by default, assign it to empty value. And here, I just assign the real value to it. This is the first place. Now, here in the subscription, I want to make a header based on the value of this token, and this is also possible. I want to do another callback before the call. But what I think is that I may do this for this call, but probably all other calls are worth to receive this bearer token. And the additional option is to just define a global callback. So this way, this function will be called before any action in this script. So I'm just adding it, and it would be executed before any action defined in this REST file. And I want to just assign a header with this token. It receives the request object because it is before, it still has a request that may be modified. I'm saying request dot set header name and value. Name is authorization header, and the token is for bearer token. The format is the following: bearer space and then actual token value. Also, since I don't want it to for the first call where it received the token, so while this token is empty, I don't want to assign this authorization. So I'm saying if token value, so if it is set, defined, and set, only in this case, I will be setting this bearer token. Now I need to save this file, but just saving doesn't work. You see it grayed out because when I'm launching any action with callback defined, it starts the debugger because the action is executed in the debugger. And my modification all stays in the editor and save is disabled while I'm in the debugger. So there are two ways to stop that, and just to stop debugger from here. And now I may save everything. Another option is to use reset button here. This also would stop the debugger, clean all the cookies collected and anything that is specific to this session. Now I may just execute these actions one by one. I may send this request. You see some verbose appears when I have a callback. And now switch to the next one and also send it. And instead of error, it returns that this user has no subscriptions. So this is just another result. It's possible and it's positive result from this action. So my token is accepted. Now, I may just record this script, but before I do this, let me show one more new option that we have in 6.7. So suppose that sometimes I want to do a negative test. I want to, my entry point is expected to return incorrect output. So let me clone this request and call it incorrect request. And let me damage this. So I'll just make invalid query here intentionally. So I'm sure that it returns syntax error and response code is 400. Now I'm fine. And now I'm going to just record the whole script. I'm doing send here. This way I initialize the token. I'm recording this step. Switching to a list of subscriptions, send, record this step, and now add an incorrect request, send, and record this step. And that's it. I'm ready to create a script. And you see that it is now, I have now created a script where first two actions are positive tests, and first is doing login, second is doing subscription by user, and last one is doing request that is incorrect by default. You see this true here. So this true means that this request is expected to return incorrect result. It's a new feature that allows you to do negative tests with Rapise 6.7. Also, you see that the format of script is different from what was before. So in this case, instead of creating the object in the object tree, it creates, it just initializes the request directly from the REST file, from the REST definition. Also, all the magic with token stays here in the callback, so the script looks streamlined. Initialize object and execute, initialize, execute, and so on. And now there are some options that help us to control how you want your API tests to be recorded. So I may easily switch it to old way of recording by going to global settings. It is settings global. Scrolling up to the API section, and I want, I may say if I want to record failed REST actions or not, and if I wanted them to be recorded this way. Also, if I want to record REST object, which was default by for the previous versions. So I may also record exactly the same script in an old way. Also, there are a couple of options that control the path and the naming of the object. So right now this object has name login, but it could be longer. If I have many REST files and all of them have login, I could say that I want to generate full name, and then it would generate name like create API test dash login. So it would be longer variable here and longer statements overall. But in this simple case, making full name doesn't make sense. So I'm using shorter paths here shorter paths to API and shorter paths to REST files. Okay, now I just changed the object generation, and I may try the same. Let me again record the same test. Send initial request, record, list subscription by user, record. Just 2 steps is enough, and create a script. Now you may see that the script is generated in a bit different way. So this is the new script after this line. So instead of getting the object from session, it uses the old way where object is taken from the object tree. So each API call in this case has corresponding entry here. So I may then work with it like that just by using this approach. But again, it's up to you which method is more preferable. So they're equivalent in the functionality. So that was the new improvements in REST testing. Also, we improved the parameter handling. So you may now have defined URL parameters even in the headers. So something may be even parameterized here, and these parameter values would be replaced. That may be useful for some cases. Last topic is improvement in mobile testing. We improved the support for C-test, and it now supports the instrumented mode that is provided by C-test. I'm not going to demonstrate it live, and you may easily find this information from the corresponding documentation section. So we go to what's new. Let's see C-test. And it describes the instrumented mode in the C-test. Well, so that's it. That's all about Rapise 6.7. I just want to invite you to the next webinar, which will be on April 20th. And we will talk about using Rapise with Cucumber.js. So how to use it all together, how to make it in a way that you utilize benefits on both BDD and Rapise, because RVL may help making your BDD tests much more powerful than without it, and they are like born for each other, and you will see why. And that's it. Welcome to this webinar. For next webinar. Now, thank you for attention, and I'm checking what questions do we have. Thanks everyone for joining today. I hope you will find this information useful. Thank you for attention, and welcome to the new webinars of Rapise. Also, small introduction, we now have weekly live streams on YouTube. You may find them on the Inflectra channel. They are live and interactive. You may ask your questions online. We will see them and we will try to reply. And you may also ask us to demonstrate something that you're interested in. So just welcome, and I hope we will see you there. Now, thank you for attention, and see you on next webinars. Have a good day.